We're live again. Hi, everyone. My name's Holly, and I'm the founder and CEO of Indigo Volunteers. And today we have a very wonderful guest called Stijn van der Leest. But before I introduce him, welcome, Megan. Hi. We are still looking for qualified nurses and doctors to come out, and also we are really looking to restart applications and open them to everyone soon. Obviously, it's got to be safe enough to do so, but we are looking into that. So please do keep an eye on our socials. And what else is there? Okay, so let's just get the guest on. So Stijn, he started his journey in 2015 in Lesbos. And he then worked in Thessaloniki in northern Greece. He then went to Serbia and then Bosnia and somewhere in the middle, Iraqi Kurdistan. And now he's in Samos, actually on the same island as me. And let's see if he's here, hopefully. Maybe not. Maybe he's not here yet. Let me just see if all is good. Oh, he's joined. Yay. Okay, so hopefully I can get him to join in the video. Fingers crossed. Hi.
Yes, as.
Yes, I can't see your video at the moment. Oh, there you are.
Yeah,
Hi. Hi. Thank you so much for joining. Okay, so the point of Let's Talk Grassroots is to speak with people who work in and around the grassroots sector, and you are one of the longest term, if not the longest term people I know that are still in the field. So you've got so much experience and knowledge, and you're currently based in Samos, working with refugees, and we Molly's saying dad. Molly's saying hi, dad. Sorry, Molly was our volunteer coordinator. So yeah, you're working with refugees on Samos. What's your role at the moment, and what does that organisation do for those that don't know?
I'm currently the field coordinator for Samos. Our organization has a warehouse where we receive items not only for us but also for other teams. We also run a free shop, which is a place where people, and in this case refugees and migrants from the camp here, can come to for mostly non-food items, clothes.
Mm-hmm. And why do they need to come to a free shop? Is there not other ways for them to get clothing, or does the camp not give out clothing?
I mean, they could technically use some of the 90 euros a person that they get per month for this, but I mean, usually all of that is going into food. So no, the camp is not providing almost anything in terms of clothing, and that's a big part of why we're there.
Yeah, and so as I said at the beginning, you've been here for a long time, coming up to 5 years. You've been working in this field, right? Where did you start? You started in Lesbos and then moved on. But what was the first motivator to get you in the field? Did you ever expect to be here this long?
No, funnily enough, having previously volunteered in Nepal, like in a school and doing the very typical sort of volunteerism type thing, I vowed to never volunteer again. So I didn't think this would be happening at all. I studied international relations for a while, got quite interested in development issues, but didn't really see, like an interesting role or an interesting, an organization that had an interesting position in all this. And then completely unrelated, I finished studying and I was looking for something to do, basically. I saw some pictures on Facebook of like dead babies washing up on the shores of Lesbos, and I don't know how I got there and how I saw this one, but like I read something about volunteering and just sort of made a snap decision to go and check it out. So I basically bought a plane ticket, got myself on board, and arrived to Lesbos without like really knowing what I was going to be doing.
And did you think you'd be here 5 years later?
Yeah, funnily enough, I think like 2 evenings later, I was pretty sure I would be doing this for a long time. Like it pretty immediately hit me as something very useful to do. Like you know what I encountered on Lesbos was I think at that time there were probably about 80 small teams working on the north coast, basically frantically helping people arrive. They came by boats at the time. On the beach where I worked, we sometimes had like, I think over 2,000 people per day. So, I mean, even with 80 teams, there was so much to do and there was so little coordination between the teams, which I immediately figured out would be a good thing to sort of like try and improve. So just doing the talking around and trying to sort of like synchronize our work a little bit. So yeah, I immediately felt like this was actually worth doing because like it was so obvious that nobody else was doing it.
Yeah. I forgot to say at the beginning as well, sorry, everyone, you can ask questions to Stijn and anything about his experience or where he's been. So I hear that you took a coordination role pretty early on. I mean, most people kind of do more frontline work like boat landings or distributing food and tents. You seem to go into the coordination role quite early on and kind of stuck with it. Is that your background or something you just love to do?
I think it's sort of just naturally, I tend to try and not do what everyone else is already doing, and boat landing was very much what everyone else was already doing, and I never witnessed much of this, but like according to my friends, there were actual fights over who was holding the babies and cuddling them so they would get warm, and I figured that would not be very useful for me to join that. So I was often the one who stayed back on the beach where we had a little station where we gave out like food and helped mothers and babies find some dry clothes, and just started talking around. And I don't think I was officially a coordinator at the time, but like I think also the turnover was so high that like pretty much anyone staying longer than 2 weeks was already pretty much a coordinator. So yeah, and the word coordinator should not be thought of too fancily, like it is just trying to keep things running, like it's
bit behind the scenes stuff. That's really funny that you mentioned that some people were like fighting over babies when they come onto the shore or boat landings. This is my beach. And a lot of people don't know that happened, right? Like it's not necessarily what people speak about, and when you think of humanitarians, people just think of like these angelic people, and actually no, there's a lot of ego, and there's a lot of territorialness, I suppose, especially at that time. Maybe not so much now. I think this has really fizzled out dramatically, but yeah, just a really interesting thing to observe there. And then after you left Greece, you went to Serbia. And you were the director of an organization, is that right? And was that the right title? And what was your role there? Because that's really interesting. And like, what drove you to Serbia?
Yeah, that is a very great question. Nobody really knows what draws people to Serbia. It's certainly not Serbia itself. But all joking aside, before Serbia, I was working in northern Greece, and at that time, a lot of people got stuck in Serbia because Hungary and Croatia were sort of like making work of shutting their borders. So they fortified the borders in such a way that a lot of people got stuck there, where before people got stuck in northern Greece because the Macedonian border was impenetrable. So I think it was a widely held idea to try and extend, the northern Greece volunteering scene into Serbia. So a bunch of small teams went. I was certainly not one of the first to go, but like I was asked by Help Refugees to, with a group of people, to start up a team and to help the grassroots there with some money and some organizational help. And after a while, one of our partner organizations, which was unfortunately called Belgrade, with an AID of aid at the end, which is a terrible name, which is probably why they changed it now into Collective Aid. Yeah, I was asked to take over the directorship there, which came as a bit of a surprise. Like, I'd obviously never done anything like it. Like, I'd basically roamed around a couple of countries, you know, like trying to do some interesting work. Yeah, and the team was quite a puzzle. I think the widely held opinion within our team was that, like, coordination was simply not necessary, and people that were going to meetings were, like, you know, career-driven arseholes that were trying to profit personally of the suffering of other people. So I had a very interesting 8 months trying to set up some structure and appoint, you know, set coordinators and improve relationships with other teams around. But in the end, a really interesting experience, and certainly tried a lot of things for the first time there.
And it's really interesting that you said that you've never done anything like that before, because I think in this sector, you are thrown into positions that would take you like 5 or 10 years to get into in the normal world, you know, back home. So yeah, I mean, when would you ever be the director of an NGO that was, I mean, you guys were at the time feeding 800 people in the camp and doing activities. Like, it wasn't by any means a small project, right? And I just think that's really, really interesting. So feel free to respond to that. But also, Clark is saying, how did you survive? I guess he means Serbia.
Well, Clark, certainly Iraqi helped a lot. How did I survive?
What was the earliest
I don't
time
know.
you drank rakia?
Sorry?
What was the earliest time of day that you drank a rakia?
I mean, in Serbia, you don't always have a choice. So, like, when you join a meeting that is unfortunately early, and your Serbian counterpart insists that you try his local brewing rakia, like, you sort of have to do it, which, yeah, gets really early. And it does help when there's a lot of organizational headaches. Otherwise, you know, like, it was certain people being around that, you know, provided me with a lot of help, with some good conversations about everything that was going on. And it was really hard. Like, a bunch of people within the team quite hated each other. I think a bunch of people might have quite disliked me as well. So it was funny at the time, because sometimes we had visitors, you know, turning up to our kitchen and leaving after 4 days saying, like, oh, this is the most wonderful, you're the most wonderful bunch of people ever. And I was always sort of grinning at myself, thinking, like, you should, you know, you should know what sort of ugliness goes on behind the scenes here.
But that shows you did a fantastic job, because so much of management is trying to exactly manage all the chaos behind the scenes so people can do their job well, right? That's exactly what it is. Orla has asked, what brought you to Samos in particular?
Jesus. I don't think anything in particular. Like, I've always made my choices by just sort of following, by just sort of like taking the opportunities that happened, and in this case, Help Refugees indicated that they wanted an extra team member, and I was happy to come out. Also, my girlfriend worked there at the time, which was a big plus.
That sounds great. And so you joined Help Refugees originally when you went, or were you with another organisation?
Before Samos, I joined Help Refugees in, I guess, in northern Greece, but only to go immediately to Serbia. But yeah, I spent the majority of my time in the field with them.
And then after Serbia, you then went to Bosnia. I mean, you've been to so many places. You then went to Bosnia. What drove you to Bosnia, and what did you do there? Because that also sounded like an absolutely chaotic time.
This was another girlfriend-related decision. Basically, I was super tired and I wanted to go home. And I told my mom that I was going to obviously, you know, sleep in the attic again for a while, and that I would be home by Saturday. And I think it was Wednesday at the time. And somehow, in between Wednesday and Saturday, I got convinced to to come and help in Bosnia, where at that point there was just quite a lot happening and there was quite a lot of people stranded on the streets. A mutual friend of ours had asked for help before, and yeah, sort of was another last-minute snap decision to to try Bosnia and to just sort of see what would happen there.
And can you explain like why was there a surge of people in Bosnia? Like what happened, and then what was your primary response that you were doing?
Yeah, so nobody really ever expected Bosnia to become a refugee crisis country, because like from Serbia you can cross either the Croatian or the Hungarian border, and like using Bosnia in between, which lies to the west of Serbia, basically adds another country to go to Croatia. But as the borders were shut quite strongly at the time, people were quite desperate to find another way into Europe. So suddenly Bosnia, which is very mountainous, has a lot of landmines, has obviously very little infrastructure to support refugees, became, I don't want to say flooded, but like had like quite a lot of new arrivals coming, and were also quite unprepared. So, and this is where the network of grassroots organizations is really strong. Like, some people that we knew from other organizations that I worked in were already there, saying that like, hey, listen, there's this shelter project that we're setting up and it really needs some help. So like, if anyone is available, please like come over. And then I always tend to think that a lot of people will come over, but like actually that usually doesn't happen until there's a lot of media attention to that place, which wasn't the case at the time. So yeah, we just went over to see how we could help, and ended up being the project leader for a project called House of All, which was basically an abandoned hotel building, or like a finished hotel building that was not used, which was then used to host 20 families or up to 100 people, who we picked off the street, by basically trying to select which were the most vulnerable people there, which was a difficult job to do.
Yeah.
And then we were actually a completely random bunch of volunteers from different countries, different ages, different backgrounds, different ideologies as well, who were just sort of trying to make it work under what was, like, it was not an official organization. It was basically just a group of people that, was grouped together under the header House of All.
Yeah. And I also remember at the time, like, as you say about it, when people were crossing the borders, they still had landmines they hadn't cleared. So sometimes people were getting maps where they thought the landmines were to avoid. I mean, it was terrifying, wasn't it? If people have just started tuning in, this is the Let's Talk Grassroots, where we are Stijn and Leest. I've got a question for you from Sam. Stijn, do you feel like the grassroots organisations in which you collaborated with in Serbia and Bosnia adequately filled in the gaps left by state-run attempts at intervention? And what were the major gaps you saw in both state and non-state intervention? What was the profile of the average volunteer? Wow, great question.
You might have to remind me of that. That is a great sort of layered question. I mean, I think in general you can say that, like, wherever I've been, that the state has never supplied sufficient anything. Like, even if camps are being provided, like, the amount of shelter is usually not enough. The shelter is certainly inadequate, as in usually quite inhumanely poor. Food is usually absolute shit, and I mean, with some exceptions, anything else is hardly ever provided by the state. Big organizations, which, like, you tend to think must really know what they're doing and must have like this massive reach. If you watch commercials by, the bigger actors, you always feel like, oh, they're the ones that, like, are taking care of these African children that we can see in the commercial. In fact, they're usually, like, they will take on food for one of the camps, and then there are 17 other camps that are like receiving food that is provided by, in the case of Serbia, a company that is that belongs to the brother of the Commissioner for Refugees, who obviously embezzles quite a bit of money, delivers seriously shit food for the money. And yeah, so in answer to your question, I think there's a need for everything, and do the grassroots fill the gaps adequately? I think sometimes yes, sometimes no. That is a really hard question to answer, but for sure, even shit grassroots groups usually do a lot of good just by being there. So even a terribly run food project somewhere that is, run by drunken anarchists that like constantly, go into massive fight against everyone else, I tend to get food on the table that actually helps people, that helps survive.
Mm.
I don't know if that is sufficient to answer the question. I feel the question was like way bigger than this.
You did great. I mean, I wouldn't even know where to start. We've got a question from Nina here. What do you suggest is the best way to get into the sector that you're in? It's a fabulous question, and one that gets asked all the time.
I mean, the cheap shot here is to say, like, sign up to Indigo and they will place you somewhere. And, I was lucky enough in Bosnia to have the help of Indigo in selecting our coordinators, who were all absolutely fantastic. Where I think, no, there were a bunch that had already served time at Greek islands before. But still, most of the people I work with every day are like people whose coordinator position in my current team is the first coordinator position in the humanitarian field. Mm. So, I mean, if you don't want to go through Indigo, like you could just sort of buy a flight to Lesbos and you will run, and like if you hang around Mytilene long enough, you will meet humanitarians and you will find your way in. Same for Serbia and Bosnia.
I would say, I'd say really similar. Like I think volunteering is a really great way to see if it's for you, right? Like it's not something, if you just sign up to MSF and manage to get placed somewhere, the commitment is quite a bit longer and can be in a bit more extreme circumstances than environments than in Greece. And so I think this is a good testing the water that this environment is for you, because some people get out here and they're like, okay, great, but I this is not how I want to live my life. And some people are a bit more timid, thinking, I'm not sure, and then they get here and they thrive. So it's really good to just test the water. Obviously, I'd recommend for Indigo because we do skills matching, but so you get placed in what would be the best placement that we can find for people. But also, out. And you mentioned that as well, that like a common theme with your experience and stories are you turned up and then worked out there. Like you had a rough thread to go by, but you just turned up and really went in most cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I'm not sure. Like in the early days on Lesbos, it was absolute madness. Like people were just dripping into the island. I hadn't even arranged my ride. Like I bumped into a couple of people on the airport that actually, gave me a lift to the town that I was going for. And literally, I just bumped into a bunch of people that were running a tent on a beach, and I ended up helping them, trying to keep their tents up when the wind was trying to blow them over, and it sort of just all happened. I think by now groups are a lot more organized and are not generally just hiring, people they find on the street. But I think if you, again, if you don't want to use Indigo, like just Google, the location that you want to go to and refugees, and you will find Facebook is a good tool. You will find something.
Now I know you quite well, and even I don't understand. Somewhere in between all of this, you went to Iraqi Kurdistan and worked there. Like, when did you fit all of that in between all this, and what on earth did you do there? Because that's not the European refugee route, right? So you curveballed.
That's a very valid question. I started from, I did that from Lesbos, where at the time I was working with a a Kurdish man who originally from Iraq but had lived in Sweden, had like himself fled to Sweden when he was 8, if I'm not mistaken. And he had come to Lesbos to help, and you know, like I partially joined his team, and we were doing a lot of stuff together. And he was always saying, when we were in Idomeni in the north of Greece, that he wanted to really go back to his home country to see if they could, if we could help refugees there. Because, like, generally, I think also in the media, what is massively underreported is that, like, most people from the Middle East don't go to Europe. Like, most people in the Middle East stay in the Middle East, and Iraqi Kurdistan at that time had approximately 1.5 million refugees. I think Jordan has way more, and Lebanon as well. So obviously, I mean, it was clear that there was a lot needed, but I didn't even know what Iraqi Kurdistan was. He just said Kurdistan, and I just assumed that it was that stuff happening in northern Syria, the Rohingya thing, and it sounded interesting. So yeah, I just sort of joined him. It's a fairly long story. We tried to set up a project ourselves, and after like a 1 month sort of fact-finding mission, we made some plans, went home to prepare. And then I came out again, and my friend got into a fairly bad burnout, also needed some time to recollect himself. He had worked for years on the refugee route, and I was there feeling quite inequipped to lead a whole project that I wasn't technically fully part of. And was then invited by a friend who was volunteering for a Yazidi organization called Yazda, which was a local grassroots group led by Yazidis who survived the genocide by ISIS in 2014, and who basically led a bunch of projects, mainly a psychosocial center to help, you know, the people from their community cope with the terrible things that happened there. So I joined the team also with no clear plan on what I was going to do. Ended up helping my friend with running the psychosocial center, and at some point, and this is one of my favorite projects ever, got like a pot of 20,000 euro that I could spend on aid for Yazidis, and we decided to provide goats and chickens to female-headed households. So like these are households where the man has been either murdered or disappeared, and where the mother has survived with, you know, any amount of children. So yeah, my job was to try and select people that were in need of it, and make arrangements such that they wouldn't immediately sell the goats to get like the whatever 400 or 500 euros to pay for medical bills. So we designed a little program where like we had a check-in every month to make sure that like they were using the goats for milk, and to try and produce offspring which would like maybe result in a herd, which, you know, a herd of goats in Iraqi Kurdistan is easily living if you do it well.
Wow. Yeah, that's, I don't think I've met anyone that's done any project like that, especially when people come here, they kind of tend to stick here, and yet you still somewhere in between all of this went off and did that. That's just, it's fascinating. We've also got,
I mean, it was all completely random, and like for most of the time I really don't know what I'm doing, and you know, like I just sort of try and see if I can find a little gap that I can jump in. And like in the case of Kurdistan, after a couple of months, I actually realized that like I was completely unequipped to do this. You know, to be working with translators who constantly needed to explain to me everything about like how local life worked, and to speak to refugees who, yeah, they don't come from Kurdistan, from Iraq, they're mostly from Syria. But because like their country is so close to the host country, they actually find their way around pretty easily. Whereas like I don't understand anything about like, you know, the local healthcare system. I don't even understand like the camp system. I don't understand how relationships between the camps and the local community happen. So I realized that, you know, this is something you have to be a bit more prepared for. So I decided to go back after that to the European refugee route, because I think in stark contrast with most other humanitarian spheres, like the European refugee route is particularly messy and the bigger NGOs seem particularly badly set up to help here. You know, like especially in the third world, which I can't use as a term, so I guess like the global south. I mean, I guess the bigger NGOs are able to basically buy their way into, you know, organizing things. So like if they need to build a camp, they just bring a pot of money, which is usually not even that much money, and basically create the space to do their projects, and local people in charge usually understand that they can profit a bit from this, and are usually quite welcoming of this, especially compared to the European context, where, you know, like Greece is not a third world country. It is a European country, and a proud European country. And preceding the refugee crisis was the economic crisis, where like the Western intervention into their economy was taken particularly badly, and was particularly damaging. So there was a lot of skepticism at that time on having, you know, Western aid flowing into Greece, like acting as if Greece did not know what they were doing. So yeah, it was, and it still is very hard to operate in Greece. And very regularly I speak to experienced humanitarians who come to Greece and say like, well, this is such a mess. Like, this is such a complicated context where like local politics, EU politics, you know, national politics all sort of interplay into this mess.
I remember reading an article at the beginning of when I came out to Greece in 2016 about how normally international charities could blame things like safety or infrastructure or whatever for why a project might not be running well. But in Greece, when really the infrastructure is there and the safety really isn't the issue, they were struggling to find excuses. It's really, really interesting, the whole world. We've got a really good question. If we're going to be wrapping up soon because it's already past. God, how has that gone so quickly? And we've got a question from Molly. From your experience, what would you say are the major differences in impact between short-term and long-term volunteering, assuming there's a difference at all?
I don't know. Like, I think that this work is fairly difficult, especially. I mean, the solutions for these sort of problems are I think really simple, and as in like really commonsensical and straightforward. Like, people have very basic needs and they need to be met, and usually the thing in the way of meeting those needs is politics, both like, you know, national politics, local politics, but also NGO politics. And to really have an impact, it does pay off like sticking around for a while and getting to understand how the whole sector works. So like, how do big NGOs work? How do medium NGOs work? How do anarchist madness small NGOs work? Like, how can you use everyone's strength to actually get where you want to go? Like, how, I mean, I still don't understand how local politics work, but like, how do you find a way around the fact that you don't know how local politics work?
Yeah.
If you don't want to go into that, like, I would say I mean, for example, our organization, Refugee for Refugees, we run a warehouse and a free shop, which the basic tasks can be very simple. It can be just packing stuff, like from box to box, like it can be, you know, offloading a truck, stocking a free shop, but also participating in mass distributions, which like takes a bit of learning, but can be learned quite easily. As in, I think usually within a couple of days, you learn a couple of like really important lessons about how, you know, aid works and doesn't work. I don't think if there's a conceptual difference between staying longer term and shorter term. I think there's probably more similarities than not.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. And as long as you're putting people in the right positions, like if you're going to put, you know, someone that's here for a week and constantly turn, as a teacher in a classroom, and constantly turn over that person every week, well, that's obviously not good for anyone. But as you say, like if someone's going to work in the warehouse, if someone's going to do food distributions or whatever it is, you can actually have short-term volunteers. Obviously, the longer anyone stays, the better.
No, not even always true, I think. Like,
yeah.
I think volunteers also tend to get like really emotionally involved, tend to drink a lot, sleep very little and get really attached to their work. And I'm sometimes wondering what is the best amount of time to volunteer. And I think it's either, you know, forever or for a couple of months. But like,
so you're already in the forever category because you've gone past a couple of months.
I am, as a human, terribly dysfunctional. I try to hide that, and I hope I do it well enough to maintain my job. But yeah.
We've had some really great questions come through. If you've got any more, do ping them quickly, because we're just going to be doing a few quick fire questions for you, Stijn van der Leest. Okay, what surprised you most about the humanitarian sector?
That no one really seems to be knowing what they're doing. Like I think we all have this sort of assumption that, like, you know, the experts know what they're doing. And I think if I learned anything here, but also in previous stages, is that, like, every time you think that, like, you know, the next level up people are for sure going to know what they're doing, it can be quite disappointing. Yeah. It is a lot of improvisation, and even the bigger NGOs are usually improvising more than they would like to admit.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say is, you're not just talking about grassroots here, you're talking about international NGOs that sometimes they ask the grassroots for advice, even though you'd think they have way more experience. It's just not true. Everyone's just trying their best for some reason, because it's quite a chaotic environment maybe. I don't know what all the reasons are, but it doesn't somehow translate to everyone knowing what they're doing. Yeah, I agree with that one. So we've got a question from Kitty. How do you cope personally? And this is really interesting, because one of the questions I was going to ask you was, you know, some might describe you as a nihilist without much hope for mankind. So with someone of your outlook, how do you cope?
I mean, the good thing about not having much hope is that, like, it becomes easier to accept that, like, life is just intrinsically very messy, and a lot of people have suffered through history and are suffering. Like, you know, like the idea that there needs to be some sort of, like, you know, sweet equilibrium where everyone is happy. I mean, I can't really see it happen. And maybe we shouldn't even strive for it, you know, like it's so, I don't know how to cope. Like, I often wonder this, and sleeping helps a lot, you know, like swimming helps a lot, you know, doing personal care helps a lot, but, like, ultimately it is really hard to make sense of the fact that, you know, 8,000 people that are living literally, what, like 500 meters from my house are going through this horrible shit, and there's nothing much we can do about it, right? Like, yeah, we give diapers, we give baby food, we give clothes, but, like, that is not really helping anyone, you know, in a considerable way. So
I think throwing yourself into the work is one way many people cope. Obviously, there's a lot of people that drink. I mean, not that everyone here is an alcoholic by any stretch of the imagination, but people do things like drinking or having PTSD and not addressing it, and that's something that we're, as Indigo, trying to help, is facilitating psychosocial support and things, because it's really hard work and it can be really tough and have a really big impact on you. Not everyone, but it can do, and I think that people deal with it completely in different ways. I think not in Samos, like, people seem, you know, really quite functional here, but when we were in Bosnia, I know that that wasn't the case for everyone, unfortunately. Sorry, and also quick fire. What motivates you in the morning?
I mean, staying in bed rarely makes the day any better, and I do think coordination roles are pretty hard, I think, in this field, because, like, you're dealing with a lot of shit. You're dealing with less of the, you know, the payoff of being able to be more frontline and to feel that you're helping. So for me, like doing a distribution every now and then really helps. You know, like feeling that the work that I'm putting in, which is sometimes quite remote, and I'm sometimes questioning whether it all makes sense, and like, you know, handing out some aid items does do something I think that is mainly also about interacting with the people you work for. And I think, you know, like in Idemeni, a Syrian guy once pulled me aside and sort of said like, hey, the food that these guys are providing is like absolutely terrible. I really don't like it. But like, I so really appreciate the fact that like all of you random people just showed up here to try and help. So basically suggesting that we were pretty shit, but like that, like what really mattered was the fact that we were trying to do something. And this is what I believe is good about the grassroots, and this is what we're good at compared to the bigger NGOs who try and maintain a form of professionalism, which is obviously a part that like sometimes the grassroots is completely missing. But good thing about being unprofessional is that like you're usually being human, and that can provide some hope.
That's nice. That reminds me of a story of when I came back one evening from a gathering, a social gathering, and there was a man sitting near my front door, and he was obviously, it was a refugee. He had shoes on that were like half the size of his feet, and it was about 2 a.m. Anyway, it wasn't it made me feel just so sad. Like, did he even have a tent? I don't know. I had all these questions, and I went upstairs and I felt really uncomfortable. So I went down and I gave him some. I said, "Do you want anything?" He said no, but of course everyone said no. So I went down and I gave him some water, and then I went back down and gave him some food, and then I went back down and I gave him a blanket. I said, "Was the food okay?" And he was so grateful for everything, by the way, and he said, "It needs salt." And I was like, that's so great that he just said that in such a, I don't know, I just really appreciated the honesty, and yeah, it needs salt. I love it. It was true. And okay, so we've answered earlier about how people can get involved in the sector. You mentioned about staying in your mum's attic. What compromises do you think that people make being in the sector, and how does that balance out with the rewards? I don't know what the right word is, but what you get out of it. And this is the final question.
It's a good question. Thanks for mentioning my mom's attic. Like, you know, obviously it was never really my plan to, you know, still really don't have a house or another place to stay than my mom's attic at the age of, what is it, 35 at this point. And yes, the work is, you know, for me, what I like about this work is that it's basically one big study in how humans cope with shit. And like, you know, like, yes, you don't get paid much. There's a little shit going on. Like it can be really taxing because, like, you know, everyone overworks, everyone drinks a lot. So like, it's hard to do self-care in an environment like this. And I do really struggle with like having to conceptualize what it means to go home. Like, you know, like usually when you're going on a holiday, you're going to a place where you're not home, and, you know, you can just do whatever the hell you want. When you're working abroad, like actually what I tend to crave when I'm not working is being home. But then being home for a short time means trying to meet as many friends as possible, catching up a lot, which is very energy consuming, which then leads to a lot of tiredness, which you then bring back, you know, into your work if you, like after 2 weeks of taking a break. And this is where, interestingly, and I never thought I would say this, where like, you know, like sort of better salaries and just more luxurious secondary arrangements, working arrangements, like, you know, like holidays where your flight home is being paid for, and some generous time off does really, I think, improve the work in the longer term. But yeah, it is hard to balance. Like, it's honestly I would do this work forever if it were not for the fact that I don't think any human that doesn't thoroughly hate him or herself, pardon me, can sustain this work for a longer time.
I love how you answer questions. You're so clearly a philosopher in how you answer questions. Stijn van der Leest, it sounds like you have many birds that need feeding, and so I'm going to let you go. This has gone on. This has gone in a flash. Thank you so much for your time. I know that everyone will appreciate hearing from you. Honestly, I think you're the longest standing volunteer, as I say, so it's been really valuable. And thank you everyone for the questions. Really, really appreciate them. And reminder about medical volunteers. If you know anyone medical, please get them in touch. We'll be opening applications at Indigo as soon as it's safe to do so, but it's looking maybe soon. And yes, Stijn van der Leest, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay.